Hey, so I decided to finally record. Mind my voice is still a little rough, but let's just get this going. So about a year ago, I got into anime. I think January 2019, in fact. Pretty much like a week or two into January, I was sort of lost. I didn't know what to do, and then I kind of had some free time for once. I think I was on my break. Or no. Anyways, point being, I finally decided to get into anime. I had watched a show called Agretsuko on Netflix a few months before. That was my first anime I think I've watched on my own. That isn't something popular on TV. In January, though, I decided to start from Netflix and move on from there. Currently, I'm watching from like Crunchyroll, and I've watched from a few other sites as well. But I think it's about time I make a video on the anime I watched in 2019. This is an anime that is specifically 2019 only. But it's anime that I watched in 2019, my first year of watching. Let's go. Let's start it off with some sad shit, some cryboy hours, as I like to call it. So I think one of the first few shows I watched in January, in general, was Your Lie in April, which is I'm not gonna spoil anything, but it's a musical series about these two characters. It's a romance, but it sort of had a lot of weight to it, and it was a nice adventure. It was everything I wanted. I cried probably a couple times in that. And then I watched Violet Evergarden. It's about a messenger in war that has struggles with emotions because they're, But the biggest thing is that she sort of pieces together what happens in that war and finds out some interesting things. And I think what was more emotional about it than her piecing together the war, like her side of the story, it was the stories that she had to deal with to sort of learn her emotions and what emotions mean to her. Then there's March Comes In Like a Lion, which is a slow burner. Season 1 I enjoyed, but it was hard to keep watching because I have ADHD and it is a lot more slow paced. Still a really rewarding season to watch, but season 2 is when things really kicked off and I sort of had more establishment with the characters, and I sort of fell in love with the main character and how he was kind of a prodigy child, but he still had his own emotional struggles, and he's learning how to cope with and to rely on friends. So that sort of spoke out to me in the fact that I couldn't relate exactly with the character, but I empathized with what he was dealing with. Then there's A Silent Voice, which technically isn't an anime, it's a movie, but I think it's the movie that made me cry the most, like period. So I haven't watched Your Name or any of that yet, so bear with me. It's a great story about a bully who I guess sort of matured and moved on. He used to bully this deaf kid, and then he sort of moved on. I think within time he sort of started to regret that sort of stuff, and then they sort of fall in love with each other. It's just something that you'd have to watch. It's like 2 hours long or something like that, but the story says it all. Then there's Bunny Girl Senpai, which by the name of the show and by the description, you think, how could this be really emotional at all? It sounds like a fan service casual weeb trap to sort of hook in easy viewers, but instead Bunny Girl Senpai was really a great story about how this character copes with these strange adolescent phenomenons that only really teenagers dealt with. His relationship with the characters was amazing and very believable and very real, but he still had a really good sense of humor with the main character Mai, and they sort of hit off together in the best way, and the show doesn't really hesitate. So that was a great feeling to watch after watching some more generic shows. Then there's Toradora, which you kind of know exactly what's going to happen, but it's the journey, how you got to the conclusion, that really sort of helps you, and you really sort of get to enjoy and immerse yourself in the characters and that world. Then there's Angel Beats, which is a very strange show about, I don't really want to talk too much about it because it is a great show, but it's one of those that it's kind of one of those things that you just need to shut up and watch. The ending, I felt like I should have cried, but I did. I was speechless, to say the least. Then there's A Place Further Than the Universe, another show that I felt like I should have cried, but I was more or less speechless than anything. It's also in the same category. It's just about, or the same category of me not really wanting to explain it. The story is mostly show, not say, or however you would call that. So it's about a person that goes to Antarctica, which is insane, and then nobody believes her, and she's sort of an outcast in that regard. And then some other friends sort of get involved in that journey. One of them is tired of living in the same sort of scenery, same sort of people, and wants to explore somewhere crazy, and it's sort of headed off in that light. And then there's the Monogatari series, which I have not completed, but I love how dorky the main character is, and seeing him just get demolished every now and then is fun. And I like the characters in that show because they all play off of each other very interestingly. They have a very interesting dynamic. Then there's Pet Girl, which is, I guess, about this guy who feels inferior to everyone around him, but sort of falls in love. It's a kind of a typical romance in its concept, but it's a very good romance in its execution. Similar boat to Angel Beats and Place for the Universe. Just need to shut up and watch it and sort of let the story take you far. Then there's Working, which is a show where I think I teared up a couple times. Like, they have so many characters in this show, but you get so involved with each one of them, and their arcs are so interesting, and how they interact with each other is amazing, and the ending just pays off. It's a really nice show to watch. It really makes you root for some of the characters. Then there's Fruits Basket. It's generic in its concept, but it's still also very interesting. But I watched the more modern take because the older one, I didn't really feel like getting into that. The art style kind of throws me off a little bit on older animes, so I'll have to ease into that more. But it was much easier just to pick up from a modern perspective, and I've heard this from multiple people. I've heard this one's better in regards of how it fits the author's intentions more. I guess it's kind of like a yaoi, but it's about like how a bunch of guys are affected by this one very bright individual. Not bright in an intellect way, but bright in personality. And then there's Love is War, which is a show about two people trying to make the other person confess, and that's a really good story. The four main characters are really interesting. They have quite the funny dynamics, so it's a bit more on the comedy side, but still hits close to home for some people. There's Hinamatsuri, which is an interesting and unique anime, which has a very unique main character, a member of the Yakuza, the Japanese mafia, if you want to call it, who pretty much has to take responsibility of this runt, essentially, this bothersome child. But there's a character in there, I think named Anzu, or something like that, and she's just a splendid character, and it makes you feel like, man, if only the main character was put up with her instead. But that's also one of those things where it's just like, you definitely just gotta sit down and watch it. Then there's Run with the Wind, which is a show about running, which is interesting because you're like, how is that interesting? But it's a very heavily focused about the 20, I think, main characters. There's a lot of characters, similar to Working, where you want to root for certain characters. So that's a really good show. But that's all like the more moody stuff. I think it's time to move on to a little bit more of the shonen stuff and classics, I guess, as well. Shows like Gurren Lagann, which is about, I don't really even want to spoil too much. It's definitely one of those great shows that you would just watch in awe with your jaw open the entire time. Just so much happens. And then there's Kill la Kill, which is in a similar boat. So much happens, and the concept alone is interesting enough. And then there's shows like Seven Deadly Sins, which is a really fun show. You can kind of turn your brain off and just enjoy it. There's also shows like One Punch Man, which is in a similar boat, but you get this overpowered premise. You're like, this character is overpowered, but it's interesting because it's not like, oh, this character is overpowered, that's the main focus. It's like, oh, this character is overpowered and he's fucking bored of it. He's tired of just one punching everything. You know, he wants a challenge. He wants a real thrill. He kind of screws around a little bit just to make things harder for himself. And then there's Demon Slayer, a fucking brilliant show about three kids essentially trying to get revenge on demons. The three characters have such a good balance with each other, and they're so interesting. And even though most people are like, Zenitsu's so annoying, he won't stop yelling, he's such a virgin, he's such a loser. But even then, I didn't mind him just because he's so like stupid, and I love his voice actor. I love his voice, and I find his character just so bizarre and out there that I can just put up with them. There's My Hero Academia, which is a show about a bunch of heroes. There's not many hero animes, oddly enough, but this is probably the best one of them all, because this is the biggest one of them all. That's for damn sure. In terms of superheroes, this is the show to watch. There's so much plot, there's so much development, and you get to see the characters in the class just develop over time. It's very interesting to see their quirks and their abilities and how they learn to improve those. And then there's Dr. Stone, which is so absurd, it's so bizarre. Everything about this show, the concept alone, is just so absurd. Who thinks of this? And it's thought of by Boichi, I think his name is. He tells you exactly how to make these things that they make. They start from scratch, essentially, from Stone Age, and they move on to space even. It's so absurd, but that's why I love it. And then there's funnier shows like Psyche K, which is just hilarious. there's so much about it more than just comedy. You get to see how the main character just doesn't want to have to put up with too much, but then you see how he still puts up with a lot just to save himself, but also kind of to save his friend group. It's very interesting. I really love the English dub of that and Konosuba. There's a really good English dubs. If you don't feel like reading subtitles, or you just can't get into that for some reason, watch those shows. They're so brilliantly done. I think only season 1 for Psyche K is out though in the dub. And there's Danshi Nichijou, Everyday Lives of High School Boys, which is a pure comedy. There's not much romance in the fact that it's just stupid, and you get to see these 3 guys being dumb, and that's all you want from the show. You don't want anything more, and it's just so fucking funny. And then there's the contrary in a way. There's Asobi Asobase, which is a show about 3 girls instead. It's sort of flipped around, even though it's kind of a thing in Danshi Nichijou where they have a small mini segment about that. But it's fucking hilarious. It's the funniest thing. And it's just, it gets you happy no matter what. You really feel lifted. And then there's shows that are isekai, like living in another world where you just get like a reset. Like No Game No Life, which is about these overpowered 2 brother and sister who never lose. And you know they're never gonna lose. And much like Toradora, you know the outcome, but you fucking eat up the journey. You eat up how they deal with those situations and how just ridiculous that world is. And then there's Konosuba, which is similar to Asobi and Danshi. It's just so ridiculous. And you have fun. It's so refreshing seeing a scumbag character. Kazuma is one of my most favorite anime characters. He's just a scumbag, and sometimes you need that. And he's the character. He loves like gender equality. He's just an asshole in general, but you can't help be like, man, I'm fucking rooting for you. Then there's ReZero, where you also root for the main character, as every time he gets killed, he has to start over from that save. It's an isekai. He's in that life. He gets killed. He feels that pain. And some people are like, this character's so annoying. Why is he bitching so much? But it's like, these are real things to him. You're watching this show. You're not feeling the pain he is. You're not feeling the exact experiment. This guy's borderline almost insane. He's losing his fucking mind, but he pushes through. And whilst the main character, like Rem's funny. Rem's like the cliche wife everyone likes, which I don't mind her. She's okay. She's like supposed to be like the peak of waifu material, but I find that boring about her. But I still don't mind her as a character, and they make them scary. They make those characters really threatening. These small little kids is what they look like. The little devils. They're so horrifying when you first see them, when you first figure out the truth behind them. But you still realize that they're living beings, and it's sort of interesting in that regard. Then the main heroine, which is kind of interesting. People don't really like her, but I still find her to be somewhat interesting. But there's the best is I forgot her name, but she's such an interesting character as well. How she's just sort of making fun of the main character, and it's just such a breath of fresh air from all the seriousness. Then there's shows like Devil is a Part-Timer, which is a show. It's a reverse isekai. It's not about a bunch of regular dudes going into like a fantasy world and becoming heroes. It's about the fucking devil himself, Satan, a demon, whatever you want to call him. He is transported to our world, and he has to go by our standards, and that's what's so funny. Seeing this previously overpowered character having his role reversed, and then the main heroine, who's supposed to defeat hell or whatever, she has to deal with the laws of the real world, and she can't just fucking stab the devil and get it over with. Those are like the shows that really stand out, but there are some honorable mentions, like Dragon Maid. It's interesting to see the characters just goof around. And then there's Eurocamp, which is a very enlightening show about these girls who just camp out in the cold. There's not much to say about it, but it's just nice. It's just a nice break from everyday life. Then there's Shirobaka, which is a show about creating fucking anime. It's the most meta thing ever, but the characters feel stupidly human. They're all very believable. Then there's New Game, which is about creating games. It's a similar boat to that. You still like the characters. You still find everything interesting. It's still very charming. And seeing the interactions with the main characters is so interesting. And then there's Hitori Bochi, which is one of the first airing shows I watched whilst it aired, and I followed each episode. It was so funny seeing a dumb character, much like Frubo, Fruits Basket. I call it Frubo for short, but it's so similar in that regard where it's a dumb character, and just like, what the hell is this? Why is she so stupid? Why is she so charming in that fact because she's stupid? She's probably the most interesting airhead main character because she just doesn't seem to get like reality. She's just that dumb, but in a bearable way. way to where it's not too much, where it's like, ah, she's so dumb, I don't really like this show. This show is dumb because of her. Because her interaction with her friends is very funny and interesting. Then there's Real Life, which I almost didn't put on this list, but what made it interesting was that it's about this 27-year-old who has to live as a 17-year-old again for 1 year, and his experience and how he deals with love, knowing that they won't remember each other after the whole year is over. So there's that. Then there's a little bit more on the shonen side is Megalobox, which is a good underdog story, so definitely watch it if you want an underdog story. And then there's Fire Force, which I wasn't gonna put on the list at first because the first few episodes was messy and the show had controversy, especially with the Kyoto Animation Studio fire, and this show had to deal with fire, the tragic event, but it was just so interesting just having the show kind of be the underdog story, where at first it was like really hyped up, and then over time people were just like, man, this is kind of convoluted, and it was very messy in the beginning. Then recently it started picking itself back up. I wasn't gonna watch the season 2, but now I'm booked for the season 2. And then the show that started all, I mentioned it earlier, it's Agretzko, and that sort of pushed me into the realm of anime. Back when I finally got around to watching Joey the Anime Man, Akadira, Sea Dog VA, I finally watched that anime sphere because I was so interested in getting to the anime world, and I knew eventually I was, even years before. I knew when I was like 15. I'm kind of a hipster in the fact that I don't really like to watch something if there's too much talk about it, and anime was very daunting, but over time I sort of got charmed by the memes and the community, and then I sort of just started with Agretzko, took a bit of a break, and then really got started in January. 2019 was such a great year for my life, and I'm so grateful anime has sort of helped me keep my sanity, and that's what I needed.